Hello, my valued viewer, who is most likely my professor, or my parents, or one of my random friends from back home. Today I'm going to be talking about the 77s in Daniel chapter 9, and I hope I can make some sense of the craziness that is thousands of years old prophecy. Before we get started, I do want to say that I'm no prophet. I'm not some mega theologian or anything. Somebody just yelled in the dorm, and I, I have no credentials or anything. I'm just some guy who loves God and wants to share what I'm learning uh, with everyone else. Needless to say, when I present this video, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to most likely have some flaws, and it's not going to be purely factual, as it will just oftentimes be a theory or the most likely deduction that I can come up with at the current moment with the information that all of us have. Um, I'm just trying to make some sense of a several thousand-year-old prophecy. I'm some random Pentecostal Christian, so that's the view I'm going to be taking, a default Christian view. And no, being Pentecostal actually doesn't have anything to do with this specific passage, but let's just get into it before I go on a side tangent. The context of Daniel chapter 9 is that, or basically all that happens, is that the end of the Babylonian Empire occurs and the beginning of the Medo Persian Empire with a king named Darius, son of Xerxes, who's most likely Cyrus the Great, uh, comes into rule and power in 539 BC. The prophet Daniel, who's usually in some seat of authority in this entire book, really, and even in this empire, it's presumed that he has some power. um, he starts to pray about a prophecy contained in Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11, which talks about how essentially Israel will be servants to uh, Babylon and the Babylonian Empire for 70 years. The messenger Gabriel then interrupts the prayer and speaks of 77s or 70 weeks, whichever you prefer. This is split up into three categories or three groups. 7 weeks, the 62 weeks that come right after, and a separate 70th week. Now, the greater context of Daniel as a whole is that uh, the Israelites are in exile. They're in Babylon. King Nabopolassar first kind of took charge of Israel in 608 BC. King Jehoiakim, who is the second to last king in Israel's history, or the kingdom of Judah, which is separate in this time. History is confusing. Um, it says in 2 Kings 24, verse 1, that he, quote, became his vassal for 3 years. Oh, end quote. For 3 years before 605 BC, which is the year that basically everything was torn to shreds. 605 BC was the first year of deportation and exile for the Jews, where the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed, um, and a lot of the wealthy young men presumed to be of the royal line are taken into Babylon and basically trained to um, expand the empire. They're stripped of their culture and they try to brainwash them, and it doesn't work on Daniel and a couple of his friends. Um, However, the main point here I want to make is that this 70-year prophecy was fulfilled. If we go with this 605 destruction that is highly agreed upon with just historians in general, we can go 3 years back, taking the Second Kings chapter 24 information, and 3 years back makes it 608 BC was the beginning of their servitude to the Babylonian Empire. Uh, then in 538, the Medo-Persian Empire begins, and Cyrus the Great, who's I'm presuming to be Darius, um, lets everybody go back basically. And that kind of ends their servitude. It's still an hostile occupation, but it ends their full servitude of the Babylonian Empire, which is the empire specifically mentioned in Jeremiah. Uh, Now, this is what we know about the 70 weeks in Daniel. Here is Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, which is part of the passage I'm talking about. Quote, 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. End quote. Now, some of the words in here have multiple definitions, but the basic gist of this passage is that it implies an end times scenario without sin and for the most holy place to be set up as God wills for eternity. Revelation 21 says that there will be no temple in the New Jerusalem since the Lamb and the Father will act as the temple, and thus all of New Jerusalem will be God's most holy place, or Holy of Holies, as we will all be in the immediate presence of God, and there will be no more need for prophecy or visions or anything but God, really. Uh, Now, here's where the evidence points, where we have to do a bit of logical thinking on our own. The first 7 weeks are the first separated. These seem to be representing the rebuilding of the walls of the city with Nehemiah. Before this, Zerubbabel, who's another leader, was allowed to come back and rebuild the temple when Cyrus initially took control. It wasn't until 444 BC when Nehemiah came back with another return to Jerusalem, where they were able to rebuild the walls of the city and the streets, which it specifically mentions in this first set of 70 weeks. The remaining 62 sevens will also be during this time of trouble and occupation of the Persians, Greeks, and even the Romans. The distinction is that the first 7, they're working on the roads and walls. Um, According to truthnet.org, the word for weeks can also be used for 7 years. Yes, Hebrew is very strange. I want to learn it myself. But it is what it is. It was used the same way to describe the year of Jubilee, which some people practice to this day, actually. Not in completion, but a substitute, I guess. Um, this was described in 7 sets of 7 weeks, or 49 years, and where the 50th year would be the year of Jubilee. The Jews, however, used a lunar calendar. So we're going to have to do a little bit of math on our own so that we can think in our own current day's time. You see, if you take these 69 weeks, which are separate from the last one, there is the distinction which we will go over later. The first 7 weeks and the final 62 weeks, one combined makes 69 weeks, of course. When you take that and change it to just years, you get 483 lunar years. If you want to change that into days, you can multiply it by 360 days, which are how many days are in the lunar calendar. That makes a total of 173,880 days. When you want to make this into the Gregorian or modern calendar or year set, you can divide by 365. I have the wrong number there. 365.242. See, there's your mistake. I'm not a liar. I'm just wrong. um, if you do that math, you get 476 years and some change. Now, when you start with 444 BC, which is the year that Nehemiah was commissioned to go back and rebuild the walls of the city, you end up with a year of AD 33. Yes, AD, and then saying the year number is proper grammar. That's when Jesus is actually presumed to have died and come back, actually, uh, according to what people think. Now, that may or may not be true, but I'm leaning towards it being true. And the funny thing about AD and BC, and no, it does not mean after death. It means the year of our Lord. It's in Latin. It's Anno Domini, or Domini, whatever. Jesus was born around 4 to 6 BC. So the very basis of our calendar structure is technically flawed. And if you're a non Christian watching this, that's some very easy Christian slander, which Christians will never pick up on. Anyway, the reason why this math works out is because there's no year zero. In between 1 BC and 81, there's no year zero. It just goes from 1 to 1. So that's why that math works. It hurts my brain too. Don't worry, you're not the only one. Now, as for the final 7, it says that the final 7 will not begin until a ruler who we call the Antichrist. It never calls him that. The word Antichrist is actually in the epistles of John, which you can read if you want. This Antichrist will make a covenant with many people. This piece also appears to bring an agreement to rebuild the temple, which was destroyed again in AD 70. This agreement kind of ends halfway through, though, as all sacrifice and offering, thus the reason why there needs to be a temple again, is broken again as the Antichrist breaks his treaty. Then the abomination, I did it again, abomination of desolation will happen where he desecrates the temple, wait, did I say that right? He does some nasty things in the temple. That's all I'm going to say. You can read about Antiochus Epiphanes, who is not the same in Daniel 11 and 12, and I think he's recorded in the books of Maccabees, which are not canon, by the way, as well. But they are different people. Antiochus Epiphanes is what Dr. Kyneth, you who is watching this, likes to call the forerunner of the Antichrist, basically a symbol of what is to come. But Daniel 11 and 12 also talk about the Antichrist, like I just mentioned. It says that he's described as a king who exalts himself above every god, which reflects the man of lawlessness found in 2 Thessalonians 2. However, the distinction between the 69 and the last week also is reflected here, where we see that he will not reveal himself until the one who's holding him back steps out of the way. Sorry, lost my place. Chapter 12 says that the things that happen here, it will happen for a time, times, and half a time, when the power of God's holy people has finally been broken. This probably represents the second half of the final week, but we do not know the full understanding of these for certain. In fact, there's not really a distinct clue as to what specifically they might be, but we can assume that it might represent 3.5 years, as there's other hints towards this as well. The same 3.5 years, if we take the term time, times, and half a time as 1 year, 2 years, and half a year, is described again in Daniel 12, with 1290 days and 1,335 days. I'm incoherent today. Non compos mentis, as Dr. Marino would say. Both of those times are around 3.5 years. But what's more interesting is that if we take the lunar approach to the first 3.5 years and a Gregorian or modern approach to the second 3.5 years, there's a difference of 1290 and some change, meaning that God may have used both here, but again, that's speculation. What we can only presume for now is that there is a separation at some point in the middle of the tribulation, but we may not know the exact time. That's around 3.5 years. The beast described in Revelation parallels this Antichrist figure that we see in Daniel 9, 11, and 12, and 2 Thessalonians, enough to assume that they're the same unless given a contradiction or opposing evidence. We can also come to the conclusion that this is all the same time period, being Daniel's 70th week. Now we call Daniel's 70th week the tribulation, or at least that's what we will refer it to from now on. But to kind of wrap up what I've talked about is that the 70 weeks are the 48 years that Nehemiah took to rebuild the city, the 429 years between then and Jesus dying for us, and finally there's a gap in between Jesus ascending and the future being the final week. Uh, if the end of the world just happened there, that would have been crazy. But people instead were just shouting in the lounge. Um, there seems to be a gap between Jesus ascending and the final week. During the 70th week, the Antichrist will make a peace treaty, which he will break halfway through. This halfway point leads into what I like to call the Great Tribulation, what some other people call it as well. This is a portion of the tribulation where um, we get to kind of the second half of Revelation. I believe it's after chapter 13, where the bowls of wrath, God's wrath, are poured out and many battles take place. It's very brutal, very violent, and you can see that God is angry. Uh, After the 70th week, which is the tribulation, sin will be no more, and the most holy place will be set up as God wills, becoming the new Jerusalem, which we all seek and desire. But that's it for now. I hope this was good, and we can all share some knowledge here. I hope to learn more myself, and I hope you, no matter who you are, learned something from this. I mostly consulted and sometimes quoted truthnet.org, which has several documents talking about various theological concepts, really. You can see there's one on the Antichrist and his kingdom and one on the 70 weeks of Daniel. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and may God bless you today and forever. See ya.